Hello, welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is Greg Carpenter, and Greg works in the business brokerage business, and he's located in San Jose, California. Been a business sale intermediary since 1985, something over 30 years. And then the current focus of his business is on the middle market, valued from $1 million to $50 million. He was on the board of directors for the California Association of Business Brokers for 9 years, and he's a frequent speaker about how to sell a business. He's an arbitrator for the California State Bar and the Santa Clara County Bar Association. Greg has a great home in Incline Village, and he's not there all the time, so if you wanted to contact him about that, he might be interested in talking to you. Greg, thanks a lot for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about buying a business. And so there's a lot of money, a lot of things happening in Silicon Valley here, a lot of movement. Greg, what are some of the reasons that people have for buying a business?
The number one reason why people buy businesses is to be in control of their own fate. They don't like reporting to somebody else. People hate being micromanaged, and they like to have control over everything if they can. So it's also a way people can earn more money, and it's a way that people who have wonderful credentials for their profession in another country can earn as much money here without having to get their credentials reestablished in this country. So there are a lot of reasons why, but being in control of your own fate is the number one.
Yeah. And related to this, I think, is, in a sense, buying speed. And because when you're talking about buying a business rather than starting a business, starting a business can be a long and expensive process. And
That's right. And when you buy a business, you should have a pretty good idea about the revenue and the earnings of that business.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you should have a pretty good idea about what that business is worth. Buying a business as opposed to having a job gives you the opportunity to build equity as well as to make cash flow. Whereas even if you're a professional, it's pretty hard to sell your practice if you're a sole practitioner, although in some professions you can do that and get paid for some of it.
Yeah. So I had a situation a number of years ago. I'll say that I'm glad that it's a number of years ago. I can't remember. It might be 12 years ago now. My daughter and her husband started a business, or they decided they wanted to be in the restaurant business. And basically I counseled them a little bit, and I said, find a restaurant that's already doing pretty well, and then, because I'm thinking these guys need to be able to generate cash flow so that they can pay their bills, and so that I don't have to worry about them and have to cover their bills for them.
You don't want the chickens to come back home to roost, in other
something
words.
like that. So anyway, so they did find, I said, find a good community, that will support a good restaurant. And they did. And so, again, they have been in business now with that restaurant. I think it's over 12 years now.
Good for them.
And they've done very well. So, when we were talking about this over the years, in the past, the main motivation, or an awful lot of motivation, seemed to come from people who are unemployed. I think the economy is doing better now, so maybe you can tell us what's been going on as far as, again, who are the people that seem to be getting into this mode of looking for a business and so forth. What's the movement of the market like? What does it feel like to you?
Well, you pointed out a good fact, and that is that 5 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, we saw a lot of buyers that we would label them corporate refugees. Mm-hmm. They were people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who had wonderful jobs in corporations but got downsized. Uh-huh. And they found that they were fairly unemployable in those times when unemployment was high, and there were a lot of younger people that could be hired to do their job for a lot less money. Mm-hmm. The mix, though, has changed now that the economy is doing very well. Good employees are hard to find, and corporate refugees are not not as big a percentage of the buyer pool that we see. Mostly what we see are folks from other countries. I reviewed an entire year's worth of ad calls last month, consisting of several thousand ad calls. And I would guess that, I would say the vast majority of the names, I didn't do an exact percentage, but I would guess 85–90% of the names sounded like they came from some other country. They were not the Joneses and the Millers and the Smiths of the world. A lot of people from China and India and other countries as well. So I think that in today's market, we're looking at people who came here from another country looking for opportunity as entrepreneurs most of the time, and corporate refugees some of the time. Also, what we're seeing is consolidation in some of the smaller industries like property management companies, especially residential property management companies. If somebody has one of those that they want to sell, I'm sure that I can bring them multiple offers in a very short time because they're easily merged into an existing company, eliminating some overhead and making them even more profitable than they were for the seller. And there are multiple buyers that are constantly looking to buy. So we're seeing consolidation in some industries as well as more corporate buyers buying more in smaller businesses and more people here who have immigrated here from other countries rather than corporate refugees.
Yeah. Now some of that also could reflect the diversity, of Silicon Valley. So we have more Nguyen's here and so forth. A big Chinese population out in Cupertino and so on. So we are a very diverse area, and I think we've been having more diversity as a country. So they're saying, for example, the Caucasian, population, if it's not already in a minority in our country, it will be soon. At least not, not the over 50%.
Yeah, another little market segment that seems to have grown is people who have great jobs in high tech that want to have a side investment. And finding a business for someone in that situation is almost impossible because the very small businesses that they're seeking usually require a full-time working owner. And it's pretty difficult to find one that they can run as an absentee investor owner, only in some very extraordinary circumstances. So that's another category of buyer that we get a lot of calls and emails from, but we have a hard time finding anything to sell to them that would meet the
right
requirement.
Opportunity, yeah. Okay, so something that's been popular for years now is the franchise operation. So there are some people that may, actually start a business, brass tacks, ground up, and then there are other businesses that are offered through a franchise type of an arrangement. Can you compare those a little bit, as far as what opportunities there are, and what do you think, how they seem to fit with the types of buyers that you're dealing with?
For someone who's never been in business before, a franchise offers much lower risk and much higher probability of success for a long list of reasons. First of all, franchise businesses have highly developed infrastructure for controlling and managing the business, such as you would expect to see in a large corporation, whereas small independent businesses might have hardly any infrastructure whatsoever. A lot of it is in the business owner's head. In a franchise business, there's a fully developed business plan that's been market tested and evolved over time through hundreds or sometimes even thousands of business units. Whereas in a small independent business, it's whatever the owner created usually without having any other business experience. And it may work, but it doesn't work all that well. A fact in support of that argument is that typical franchise business has 50% more revenues than a similar independent business in the same industry. Franchise businesses provide complete training and support. They have equipment that's all been tested and evolved over time to be the optimal for that particular application. They have a brand name that's recognizable. If you go into a McDonald's in California or in Texas or in Boston, you know you can get a Big Mac or a Quarter Pounder and you know what it's going to be. If you go into Izzy's Hamburgers someplace, who knows what it'll be? Maybe you're the adventurous type. But the point for the business owner is a lot of people come in because they know what to expect and they know and recognize and like the brand. Franchise businesses also have continual product development. Again, a great example is McDonald's. Look at McDonald's 10, 15 years ago. It was basically hamburgers and cheeseburgers and french fries and milkshakes and Cokes. That's it. Now if you look at them, 40% of their revenue comes from wraps and other snack foods and things that weren't even on the menu 10 years ago. So they continue to evolve new products, develop new products, market test them, and roll them out in a limited way for a larger test. And for the very successful ones, they roll them out for the entire system. Whereas in a family business or an independent, one-of-a-kind business, often they do nothing to keep up with the changing world around them, and often that's the cause of their demise. The law of the jungle is evolve or die. One thing you can count on in this world is that things are going to change. And if you can't figure out how to change with them, then that's going to deter you from being very successful in your business.
Yeah. So I think I'll point out a couple of things. One is, in many respects, McDonald's is the role model for franchise operations. So it is a good example in many respects. They've certainly had their challenges, though, these last few years because, again, because of the changing market. And some people now, when you say McDonald's, it's almost a negative, you know, that they think of it, that's not quality food. And so now they're trying to develop, you know, a more healthy menu and to appeal to those.
But even
people.
The leader in the organic and supposedly healthy food, Chipotle, has really gotten a black eye recently with all the E. coli breakouts and people getting sick.
That's right. And the other thing is that there is a big range as far as the support that you get from these franchises. And so as part of your business investigation, I would suggest that you would want to find out, you know, what's being offered. With McDonald's, you can count on it. There's McDonald's University. Like I said, it is the role model as far as the support that you're going to get and so forth. But there are other franchises where they're not nearly as strong, I think.
Of course, and there are startup franchises that may or may not ever succeed, that may only have a couple of units that are working, and they're much more risky. That's much similar. And as franchise systems grow, the franchisor franchise system has to grow with it. One famous startup actually was a business broker franchise in the early 80s, VR Business Brokers. And between 1980 and 1984, they grew from a startup to 300 units. But they did not invest in their corporate infrastructure and support systems. There was a class action lawsuit.
Oh my God.
And in 1984, about half of their franchisees went independent as a result of a court ruling. So every franchise is not the magic answer. There is no magic bullet in business, and you always must conduct your due diligence to find out what you're getting involved in.
So that's what part of why we're talking about this is that, you know, people do need to go in with their eyes open and do that due diligence. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit as we go along. So why should you consider working with a business broker when buying a business?
Business brokerage is a profession. It does have a defined body of knowledge, and a business broker, if he's a good one, has developed a skill set and a depth of experience that gives him good judgment to benefit his client who's buying or selling a business. It's like, would you want to go into the ring with the ultimate fighting champion right now without any training or experience or developing your muscles?
I wouldn't want to anyway.
Probably not.
And I have some training, but it's nonetheless okay.
Yeah, so it's a similar sort of thing. And the business broker he's been to training. He's been through the school of hard knocks often. And a lot of lessons that are learned come from those experiences that sometimes are quite painful. And that enables the client to avoid feeling that pain himself, but instead learning the lesson from the business broker and following some good advice about how to pick a business, how to work with accountants and due diligence, in business valuation, how to work with attorneys, how to work with bankers and get financing, how to work with insurance brokers, understanding real estate, commercial leases, and a lot of other things that you need to know to get through a business transaction that the learning curve could be just overwhelming if you're just going out to buy one business, whereas I personally have completed well over 300 transactions. I've been there and done that, so I can probably help.
Okay. Who usually pays the fee to the broker?
It's similar to real estate. Usually, a seller will list a business with a broker and he'll pay the commission. If there's a buyer's representative broker who is with a different brokerage, usually the listing broker who is working with the seller will share the commission with the buyer's broker. Sometimes a buyer will hire a broker to go out and find a business for him, and he will pay the commission. And this enables the buyer to access businesses that are actually not on the market, and that can help the buyer avoid getting in a bidding war with a lot of other buyers, especially in a seller's market like today.
Okay. So the fact that the seller pays the commission, do you think that creates a conflict of interest for the broker?
It shouldn't. And in fact, in the California Business and Professions Code, it explicitly states that merely paying a commission to the buyer's agent does not make that agent an agent of the seller.
Okay. So who are some of the other professionals that should be involved in this business buying process?
Well, gee, I think maybe an accountant might be a good one. What do you think?
Maybe. Might be a good idea.
Certainly you would need an accountant to help you with due diligence, and perhaps, depending on the accountant's experience, interests, and qualifications, perhaps with valuation too. An attorney. You would want an attorney to check over the legal documents and make sure that you're not exposing yourself to unnecessary risk. The broker, of course, should help you with the business terms and make sure you're not exposing yourself to an unfair deal somehow there. And he can help you with comparable sale data and business valuation and so forth, as well as lead the process, help solve problems. An insurance broker, you'll need to have general liability and property damage. You may need to find the best personal benefits for your employees. It may be better than what the seller is currently providing at a more cost-effective price. Certainly a banker, unless you're paying cash for a business or the seller is carrying the note, you'll need to finance part of the purchase, and the broker can introduce you to bankers who like to finance business acquisition purchases. Not all banks do, and not all bankers like to do that. And perhaps you might even want to consider using a human resources attorney to make sure all your employment agreements and other HR documents and policies and procedures are in compliance. So are there some more that you can think of, Mike?
Well, one is you may need to get people that are familiar with certain inspection things. So, for example, environmental inspection is a big concern for a lot of people. You know, what is the potential liability? Is there a possibility that there's been some sort of contamination or other things that need to be dealt with?
That's especially true in manufacturing and distribution businesses that might be handling hazardous materials, for sure. Or even in the case where the buyer is going to be signing a triple net lease that makes him responsible for everything about the real estate.
Right.
So
yeah,
that's a good one.
I think another one might be a private investigator. So you might actually want somebody as part of your due diligence to look into some of the history or the people that you're dealing with.
Good point. You know, attorneys can do that. They have services, and many attorneys can just get.
Well, they hire their own private investigators, I guess. So.
Yeah. Well, their private investigators can find out other things if you're suspicious about something.
Right.
For sure. For sure.
So anyway, so there's a lot of people that it's worthwhile considering. When I mentioned this private investigator thing, so years ago. There was this guy named Barry Minko. I think the name might be familiar to you. So he had an operation that he called Z-Best, and was one of the biggest frauds in history. And they got Haskins and Sells at the time, which is now part of Deloitte. It was sort of an embarrassing thing, but they sucked them in because this guy was being featured, in the Entrepreneur of the Year and all this other stuff, getting a lot of great publicity. And it turned out that he was quite a fraudster, quite clever, but and the CPAs who were supposed to catch the fraud didn't initially. They were sucked in. Well, this guy, for example, he said, he had building going on, and so the auditors went, and he had all sorts of people, running around this location looking like they were building something. Well, anyway, then they went to a private investigator, after this thing blew up, and he says, I could have found a lot of these things in, just a few minutes, checking out at the county records office and so forth, whether these people had, for example, the permits for doing the building.
Wow, what a great example.
Yeah. So anyway, people don't appreciate what others can bring to the party, and what the particular abilities of them might be. And again, it's quite different than ticking and tying financial transactions.
That's right. That's why we brokers have checklists.
Yes.
Of all sorts of things that you might want to consider examining in your due diligence of the business once your offer has been accepted.
So speaking of checklists, what are some basic steps in buying a business?
I think the first thing is to look inward at yourself.
Uh-huh.
If you're the kind of guy that is hyperactive and can't sit still and has always got to be doing something to make things better and improve things and work on things, and you're constantly thinking about things, that's a good quality to have in business. Mm-hmm. You can't really be complacent and just sit back and wait for stuff to happen in business. You've got to be able to go. If you have the mentality that you can make decisions quickly based on incomplete facts and good intuition, small business is probably good for you. But if you're the kind of guy that has to know every little detail, and you keep digging and digging and digging and digging until you know the last little teensy-weensy fact before you can make a decision, you're not going to make it in small business, because by the time you get that much information, it's just too late.
Call that paralysis by analysis.
Exactly.
Okay.
And if you're also the kind of guy that you're going to find yourself sitting in front of the TV, reading your emails and watching the stock market at 10 or 10:30 in the morning instead of being at work, you're probably not going to make it either. Mm-hmm. You also need to make sure your family is on board with you, because there are going to be times when you're going to have to work all night or late in the evening or all weekend. You also need to be okay with some uncertainty about your income. When you work for a company, you can depend on getting a paycheck, and maybe once in a while a bonus too, mm-hmm. or even some sales commissions. But when you own a business, not only could you go without making income, you could end up writing checks to keep your business open for weeks or months at a time sometimes, depending on what's going on in the world around you. Mm-hmm. So you need to be sure that you have all the qualities that'll let you do it. Be a good business owner and be able to feel calm and confident about it, and keep your perspective and make good decisions, and continue to use your initiative to keep evolving the business and growing it. And you also need to be able to supervise people well and motivate and inspire and train people, unless you're just going to be a self-employed person, which is not really an established business. It's more of just a profession. Mm-hmm. So once you've decided, well, okay, I think I've got all the right qualities, I'm confident I can do it, my family's behind me, I've got the money to get started, I'm willing to take the risk, I'm okay with some uncertainty, then you need to look around and see what sorts of businesses will fit into the price range that'll give you the kind of earnings and growth potential that you're really looking for. You'll want to look at different ways you could finance the business, and you'll probably want to start going out and looking at businesses that are listed for sale, talking with the brokers and the owners, and getting up the learning curve about how the whole process works, how the financing works, and how to evaluate a business, and how to spot various risk factors that you really want to avoid. So finally, you'll get to the point where you'll find a business that you think suits all of your requirements, and that you feel confident that you can operate, and it's in an environment where you're going to be comfortable going to work every day, because that's a big thing. You're going to be spending a lot of time there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're not comfortable like cleaning toilets, then maybe the toilet cleaning business isn't for you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you need a professional office, or maybe you need to have a very high-end factory of some sort. But once you found that business and you make an offer, then if it's accepted, you'll get into your due diligence process, which we've talked about a little bit, in which you examine anything and everything that relates to whether or not you should buy that business, whether it's worth what you've agreed to pay for it,
Okay.
and whether it'll work.
Okay. Believe it or not, we're about out of time. So what I'd like
My
you
goodness.
to do maybe is just maybe throw out a final highlight or thought related to this process of buying a business, and then we'll just have to sew this thing up.
The first thing that comes to mind actually comes from Star Wars, maybe not directly from the current movie that just came out, but a quote from one of my all-time heroes is Yoda, and he says, "Do or do not. There is no try."
Okay.
And the point being, if you're going to get into business, you better be totally committed to that. You can't dabble in it. You can't say, well, I'll try this for a while. That's a recipe for failure. If you're going to get in business, do your homework thoroughly first. But when you go, you have to be totally and thoroughly committed. And you have to do whatever it takes to make that business successful. No matter how hard it is or no matter what obstacles you encounter, you're just going to have to figure it out. And you can't just give up.
All right. All right, folks. Well, we are all out of time, but I hope we've given you some things to think about. And this can be the beginning of a conversation if you'd like to work with a business broker. We'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.